All right, welcome to Forward Future Live. Today, Friday, February 20th, 2026. I'm Matt Berman.
And I'm Nick Wentz.
And of course, as always, we have an amazing show. We have some amazing guests. Let me tell you about them first. Mark Moffett, CEO of IFS. We have Dan Smoot, CEO of Vantor. Vijay, CEO of Pindrop Security. And Anastasis, co-founder and CEO of Runway. And they just dropped a brand new video model. So excited to talk to them all. Uh, Go ahead, give us a like if you're watching this and follow us at Forward Future. But first, Nick, what do you think? Let's talk about a few of the stories this week.
Yeah, we got a couple things to talk about, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was a
Starting
big
off,
week.
feels like it's always a big week in AI. Gemini 3.1 Pro is here. Let's pull up the screen share, Alex. Here we go. So hitting a 77.1% on ARC AGI2, it's a step forward in core reasoning, more than 2x 3 Pro. So quite
Yeah.
an advancement on the reasoning side.
Yeah. ARC
Um,
AGI, shout out to the ARC Prize, Greg Cameron, friend of the show. That is
Indeed.
insane from 3.0 to 3.1, getting double the score on ARC AGI. That means it is doubly as good at acquiring skills and applying them in a generalized fashion. Very, very cool.
Yeah, we need to get Greg on the show actually to talk about this because this is a real score, right? Like there
Yeah.
was a time and place when models, state of the art models, were scoring 16%. And
Right.
now we're at 77. So
Yeah.
big advances. We have a couple of comparisons here between Pro and 3
Pelican
Pro and
Bench.
3.1.
Pelican Bench and just the SVGs. I was kind of blown away by how much of a difference there was. I mean, look at the quality difference, the movement, the accuracy. It's almost like 3.1 is having more fun with it.
Yeah, it's more dynamic. There's a little bit more going on. Only the most serious benchmarks here.
This is the
Turtles on
only one that
bikes.
matters. Forget AGI.
Yeah. Oh, so I think there's one other here. Yeah, so this is pretty cool. This is
Yeah, I
a,
saw
a
this.
city planner app. So
Yeah,
watch how the model tackles complex terrain, maps out infrastructure, and simulates traffic to generate a high quality visualization.
yeah, and it does pathing and just super, super impressive. It just looks cool too,
It does look cool.
right? Look at it,
Really
great. Look
nice.
at that. Unreal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's impressive.
Yeah. So I haven't extensively tested it yet. Have you?
No, I've not.
No.
Planning to this weekend though. I'll
Yeah,
get in
for
there.
sure. I'm gonna plug it in into OpenClaw, of course, and there's really two main tests that I'm gonna be giving it. One, how's its personality as the main driver, as my main kind of frontline bot within OpenClaw, and then how does it operate behind the scenes, doing all the workflow automations that I do, and I will report back.
Matt, I'm so glad you brought up OpenClaw. I'd actually like to talk about OpenClaw.
Yeah, I might have talked about it a couple times.
Are you sick of talking about it yet?
I think I'm thinking other people are sick of hearing about it from me.
All right. So you released a video this week. It got some attention. You walked through 21 of your daily use cases. Besides the food tracking, what is your go-to these days as of the last 24 hours? What's your favorite of the 21?
I would say I'm gonna give kind of a roundabout answer. It's really a combination of a few things. So I now have a fully custom CRM that evolves and updates automatically. I now have a fully custom knowledge base. So any article, video, tweet that I come across, it all gets synced into a central repository. I can query against it in natural language. And this is all like really, really cool stuff. What I am most excited about and where I'm seeing just absolute magic is when OpenClaw automatically makes connections between these different workflows and repositories of data. So I'll be talking about a contact in my CRM and it'll say, oh, hey, you also referenced an article about the company that person worked for. don't forget to like talk about that. Like there's all these connections that it makes automatically that are I didn't instruct it to do so. It just did it. And
Yeah.
I'm just it's just so impressive how it's able to do that.
Yeah. Having all that context of your different systems, that's really what makes it so powerful. What other examples I'm curious come up when as it relates to pulling in context? Obviously, preparing for meetings, pulling in relevant news, pulling in past conversations. What are some other examples?
Yeah, so another one of my favorite, which is chapter, I don't know, 6 or so, the Fathom pipeline. So my Fathom note taker joins all the meetings, even in our internal meetings, will ingest the transcript, will determine action items, will add it to my to-do list. It will also, we use HubSpot as our CRM. It'll push tasks to HubSpot and it'll tie it all together. So if we talked about, hey, we need to do, X for this sponsor, and you said that, it will actually create the to do in uh, HubSpot with you assigned to it. Now, where it gets really crazy is it will also automatically look to see if you completed it and will automatically mark it as completed for you. So you don't need to do a thing. You just need to get it done, or I just need to get it done. So if I say, hey, I am going to deliver this PDF to the sponsor, and then it sees a day later that I did that, and it can see that because it understands my email, it will update HubSpot directly.
So you're saying OpenClaw is keeping tabs on us.
Absolutely. There's
Great.
nothing OpenClock can't see
All right.
inside our company.
Perfect. No, it has been incredible though. Um, Great. So one other question for you about OpenClaw before we move on.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who are consuming this content, watching these videos, reading this article, hearing about all this buzz. People are kind of promising the moon in a lot of ways, promising the stars. Uh, what is like a practical way for someone who might not be super technically inclined to get started with OpenClaw?
That's actually a very difficult question. If you're not super technically inclined, if you can't at a minimum or not can't, but aren't quite ready to vibe code, just the kind of general term vibe code, you're using Cursor or anti-gravity, whatever you're using to actually write code. If you can't do that, you're probably not quite ready for OpenClaw. Um, but that is only short term, right? So Meta has Manus AI. OpenAI is going to have their own version of OpenClaw, and these systems are going to be for the broad population. They're going to be completely hosted. They're going to have a lot more security. Obviously, they're going to be less flexible because of that. But I'd say um, try to learn the basics of vibe coding, and once you get that, then you can get started with OpenClaw. I know that's not exactly what you asked, but that's the answer. I think there are just a lot of security concerns, a lot of attack vectors that are enabled just by using OpenClaw, and you have to be very mindful of those things.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, be wary of the security issues. Get a baseline understanding of vibe coding. Once you're there, then start maybe considering rolling out an OpenClaw instance of your own.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, just by asking that, you made me realize maybe we need to make more content about it. Maybe some kind of deeper tutorials about the security best practices, which we already touch on in these videos, but I'll do some more.
Yeah, great. All right, let's keep moving here. Oh, so actually, yeah, we should touch on this quickly. You released this video, I think it was just yesterday.
Yeah.
Um, but kind of a surprising move, right?
Yeah, so this is a weird one because it's dynamic right now. Uh, Anthropic updated their docs, updated their terms of service to really explicitly say if you're using your subscription for anything other than a core Claude Anthropic product, that is against the terms of service. They even named their own product Agents SDK, which is more of a programmatic product. Then they kind of walked it back. My Claude subscription stopped working. I started getting authentication issues, and then suddenly yesterday, after I published a video a few hours later, it started working again. Unrelated, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah.
So we're in this weird place, and it just was such a bad look in general. Like I'm paying for my subscription. Go ahead. I'm not building a business on top of my subscription. This is just personal usage.
Yep.
I'm building a personal assistant. Let me use my credits, please.
So what are you using now?
So as of now, my primary model is Sonnet 4.6 because I wanted to test it, and it's incredibly good at tool calling, which is perfectly applicable to OpenClaw. I'm using Cursor for any coding, and I invoke it through OpenClaw through the Cursor agent CLI. And if
Hmm.
you don't know what that means, it basically means I'm just using Cursor through OpenClaw. And actually, quick shout out to Cursor because they've been so generous with giving me tokens and allowing me to play around, and I really just very much appreciate them. And it's been great being able to iterate on all this code so quickly. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm guessing a
2.5.
lot of this,
It's a lot more than that now.
yeah, and a lot of this goes, yeah, straight to Cursor. Uh, yeah, Cursor is fantastic. I know most people on the team are now using Cursor.
Yeah.
But Matt, we have our first guest here, so I think we
Yeah.
should move right into that. Uh, our first guest started his career as a trained chef, actually, and now he runs one of the fastest growing enterprise software companies in the entire world. He is Mark Moffett, the CEO of IFS, a company bringing industrial AI to industries like manufacturing, aerospace, energy, telecommunications. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I don't get too much time to cook anymore, though.
That's a bummer. What would you be cooking if you had the time to cook?
My favorite dish to cook that I still remember, and I can do it from first principles, is chicken liver patty. And anyone I make it for absolutely love it. I'm told it's the best they've ever had, but I'm sure they tell everyone that.
I don't think I've ever had that.
I don't think I have either.
It sounds interesting. Not
Well,
not like a typical American cuisine, but I'm absolutely down to try that.
well, my wife is American, and I can tell you her entire family absolutely love it. Every Thanksgiving, I'm forced to make it every year.
Oh, I love that.
So you got to cook at least once a year. That's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Mark. So IFS has been seemingly on a tear recently. But it kind of seems like you've been building towards this idea of industrial AI for a while now, and I am hoping that you can explain that to the audience what that means exactly. But early last year, maybe even before, it seemed like this breakout moment. You cross this major ARR milestone. You have a bunch of major new customers, big partnerships, Boston Dynamics, Anthropic, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
What happened? Is this the market catching up to you, or is this you skating to where the puck's going?
Do you know, it's a combination of many factors, and I genuinely think we're entirely fortuitous to be at this inflection point at this time. We're a scaled business, as you just talked about. We have the benefit of quite a long history, 43 years of being extremely focused on a core set of industry verticals, the industrial sector, so to speak. And in that industrial sector, we've been focused on the totality of what is in the asset and the service life cycle, everything from capital allocation through project and construction and build and operate and maintenance. So we find ourselves at the point where we've got such phenomenal depth and understanding about what makes up the composition of a company in an industry and the data that allows companies to operate, which in this advent of AI and innovation finds us at a point where we're just super fast to be able to identify real use cases that will move the needle from an AI perspective in the companies that we serve. So I think very much the last 43 years has put us in a position now, together with the partners you just began to talk about, to really capitalize on a phenomenal amount of growth, not for us, but for our customers. I mean, people are really struggling to find ways in which, as you will well know, to create real ROI through the application of AI.
And Mark, we have a pretty broad audience, and I want to understand as well, maybe from a high level, what does IFS actually do? What does it actually mean to apply AI in the industrial setting?
Of course. So we're an enterprise software company by origin. We're cloud native, AI native, and we provide capabilities for customers in engineering, construction, energy, utilities, oil and gas, telecommunications. You know, think of capital intensive businesses that have got big plant and equipment where they've spent lots of money in which they operate. And our software helps those companies, and more importantly, the people in those companies do their day-to-day work. So if I am a technician in the field, so I'm part of a 20,000 strong workforce in a utility, and I'm keeping the nation running, through planned maintenance, through emergency repair, IFS software helps that happen. If I'm on an aircraft in the United States, 100% of airlines in the United States are managed by, in some way, some underlying IFS technology. So we help run the industries and the economies in which we support.
Incredible. And so like just speak a little bit more about how AI comes into play. So when people hear AI, they're typically thinking about generative AI, ChatGPT, Claude. Like, is that what you mean? And maybe if it's not that, you can explain a little bit.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of different dimensions to this. The natural language or the large language models, of course, help more typically in the areas of knowledge work. So if I'm an engineer and I'm in the field and I need to write up what I found about a fault or a repair or an issue, then I can do that through voice, I can do that through text, and I can use LLMs and I can use, these capabilities in order to streamline my work. The type of AI that we're focused on developing is about under the surface. So that engineer is looking at that fault. So what is it about that fact pattern they're finding at time, and how can that be triangulated with the thousands of repairs that have been made before with the same equipment across industries, in the context of the plant in which they're operating, and how can the AI help predict issues that might arise in the future? Another example might be a technician in the morning with their job allocation. They've been routed dynamically based on severity of issues they'll find, customer need, in the case of that engineer. So that's all done through our software, the optimization, the scheduling dynamically of what a workforce, if you expand it, 20,000 people are doing on a day-to-day basis. But that same engineer, based on the jobs to be done, based on the severity of the issues, they will get a prediction on the likely equipment that that engineer is going to need when they go to make that repair. So first time fix is driven up towards 100%, which makes it economical. It obviously drives customer satisfaction. So it's these types of things.
And so, okay, it sounds extremely cool. So you're dealing with massive data sets where previously these companies may or may not even have been writing traditional software to try to make these connections, which is extremely difficult and inefficient. You come in, you kind of layer artificial intelligence on top, and you make these connections, allowing them to be much more productive, much more efficient against whatever their business is.
100%. And Alex, I think where this is so differentiated is that we take that innovation, we take that capability, but we understand the fundamentals of the end-to-end workflows in an industry. And we take the time to really understand the pain points, the trapped opportunity, and on the field with engineers, with production planners, with people on a manufacturing floor. So we really take the time to get underneath what the problems are. So when we develop capabilities, it's at the point in need that we know is going to drive real value. There's no substitute for getting to the first principles, I find.
Yeah. It's interesting in a world that is kind of consumed right now with AGI and these super intelligent AIs. It's refreshing to hear this kind of practical approach to leveraging AI just to increase efficiencies in workspaces like you're talking about. We mentioned two partnerships briefly, Anthropic and Boston Dynamics. Could you walk us through how you're partnering with those companies?
Of course, let me start with Boston Dynamics because again, it's a super practical one to understand. And we've talked about this at one of our customer events, and I think we wrote a press release on it too. So we're collaborating with Boston Dynamics and with Eversource Energy, well-known utility in the northeast of the United States. And in that particular case, if I simplify it, they have a number of things that need to be done by humans today. Inspection of long manhole ducts underneath the city of Boston would be an example. That by regulation need to be inspected on a frequent basis. It's dirty work, it's hazardous work. The skilled workforce it isn't at the level it's been before, so just difficult. With Boston Dynamics, what we did is with one of their form factor robots, so Spot the Dog, we developed an orchestration of our software to work with Spot the Dog. Spot the Dog runs along that manhole duct, 5 kilometers, whatever it is, taking all of the sensor data telemetry you can possibly imagine. So temperature, gas readings, vibrations, video, of course, sound, and they're inspecting that whole line. And when they find a fault, they find an issue, they're able to relate that to a database of previous issues, perhaps OEM information, using Anthropic and other models in order to trigger an automated workflow. So issue, corroded part, transformer in a manhole duct, need a repair, fire off a supply chain order. It goes into the supply chain. The supply chain module looks to see which is the best supplier at the best cost and optimization. Part comes into inventory, work order created, work order gets into the hand of the human goes and fixes it. So that whole closed loop work is possible through the work with Anthropic and of course the work with Spot the dog.
And Mark, as you're describing this, I'm picturing Spot the dog walking around, and it is collecting vast amount of data. Not only what you're describing, but I believe it has LiDAR on it, and it's just
Correct.
collecting tremendous world data. And so I wanted to ask you, you probably think about this every day, all day. There's been a ton of funding for world model companies, and like how do you envision potentially working with world model companies to accelerate the work that you're doing? Is IFS building world models? Are you integrating a world model? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so we are, when it makes sense, we're building our own kind of small models for esoteric use cases and so forth. But we have an attitude now, Alex, which is about not being arrogant enough or ignorant enough to think we are going to be the sole source of innovation for our customers. We understand the domain, we understand the life cycle, an asset and service life cycle, we understand the industries, enormous levels of depth. But and we have a responsibility to bring to our customers the best innovation possible to surface that into the hands of the workforce. Incidentally, from a workforce standpoint, what we're serving for, we often talk about as a company, is we're serving the 70% of the world's workforce that don't sit behind a desk. These are people in operations on a day-to-day basis. They're working in the real world. They work in complex engineering scenarios. So it's really important to us that we're thinking about this new frontier of world models. So partnerships is absolutely crucial for us, and you've called out two. There are many others. On the world model side, we got a number of very early stage conversations. There's one particularly famous world model company that's been incorporated right now as we speak, and we're in advanced conversations with that company about how we can partner with them. And they're super excited because guess what? We have the data, we have the understanding, we have the domain knowledge. So we're really excited about that. And I think for us, obviously LLMs is such a phenomenal innovation, but when you start to get into the ability to simulate real life, physical life, engineering environments, the possibilities are endless.
How much trust do you need to have in these model providers specifically? I'd imagine it's an immense amount of trust because you're talking about critical workflows and critical jobs. And so the data that is being provided to the humans on the ground or back in the office needs to be accurate. So how does that relationship work? How can you have confidence that you're going to get the right answers at the right time?
Nick, it's obviously a question and a challenge we wrestle with a lot. The nature of what we do in the mission critical nature of the industries that we serve. I mean, if you get it wrong, I mean, ultimately in certain cases, there's threat to life. So you can't afford to take any risks. So we are running all sorts of simulations and making sure that when we run our models and we're using probabilistic techniques, that we're doing so in a manner that gives us sort of the 5 nines level of confidence. But that's hard to do, but it's made a lot easier by obviously the plummeting costs of compute. So we're in a position to be able to do it. But we take our responsibility incredibly seriously. I think it would be, again, it would be naive of us to trust at face value the models by themselves. So when we put things into production, we do so with extreme levels of confidence because that's what our customers need.
Yeah.
Mark, I can imagine you mentioned extreme levels of compute. I can imagine IFS has extreme levels of demand for compute. Are you feeling the squeeze from these frontier AI labs kind of gobbling up all the compute that's out there? Like how is your business reacting to that?
Yeah, well, we're a customer from a computational sense. We've got a big strategic relationship with Microsoft by way of example, and there's a number of others too. We haven't experienced any issues yet as far as our demands and needs are concerned, but it's obviously something that we keep a close eye on. I think our strategic relationship with Microsoft obviously helps massively in that regard. They're in every territory in which we operate majorly.
So I want to go back briefly to these world models, just because there's so much to uncover here. Are you all using world models and digital twins together? How do those two concepts relate to one another in your context, in your business? What kind of applications are you finding for both of those things?
Yeah, well, from a kind of PLM, CAD, design engineering perspective, there's a number, again, there's a number of partnerships we're long down the track in developing so we can create closed loop intelligence when it comes to engineering, PLM, all the way through operate and maintain. So we see that as a critical partnership. World models obviously bring a very different capability to bear because that's looking at the actuality and the physical instance of the planned design from an engineering standpoint. So they're not mutually exclusive, and we need to build partnerships with both. Ultimately, what we're there to do is to identify the massive opportunity in the hand of our end customers, the companies that we serve, working with these partnerships. But this is breaking frontier stuff. We're pretty early in the development, so it's not like we've got it cracked by any means. But you better believe we're running after it as hard as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And Mark, where are you guys headquartered?
So we're actually by origin, we're a Swedish company. We were founded in Sweden. Most of the management team are based in London or in the US. So we would consider ourselves to be global, but with strong roots in the US, within Europe too, of course, through the UK and if you include the UK and Europe and Sweden.
And where are you doing most of, I guess if you're doing manufacturing, we're trying to bring manufacturing back to the US. Is that something that is of concern to IFS? How do you think about that?
I mean, from an IFS standpoint, it's an opportunity. I mean, most of our customers are going through serious change as a consequence of, new world order as it relates to trade and the reindustrialization of Western economies. And it's not just manufacturing. If you think about the level of capital investment that's going into grid infrastructure and anything associated with power and energy more generally, there's a huge amount of investment going in. So it's an opportunity for us, candidly. Equally, from a kind of supply chain perspective, the criticality of managing scenarios in supply chain right now, given the level of change that we're going through on quite a frequent basis, again, is something that we really benefit from. But we're there ultimately to serve our customers and how they're facing off to some of these challenges. So we're standing right there with them.
We haven't talked a lot about physical AI in terms of humanoid robotics. I'm curious to get your take on advances in humanoid robotics and what impact that will have on your business. What is the ideal state when we start seeing more and more of these robots in the factory setting, in some of these industrial settings? Is it everything from robots can increase the efficiency of that plant or whatever it is, to actually maintaining other mechanical things or other robots? What is the ideal state of all of this when it's all said and done?
I guess with the different form factors that are available right now in humanoids is perhaps the more nascent, although it's rapidly developing as we know. The impact in our business is to make sure that we can orchestrate both the human workforce and the robotic workforce. And that was the example with Spot the Dog earlier. So our software can orchestrate Spot the Dog in the context of our customer environment and the technology it's being used. The only variable for us is where our customers see the substitution of robotics for human labor. And how far does that go? I mean, time is only going to tell. I think where it's hazardous environments or it's unsafe work, I mean, from my perspective, that would be where I would put most of my emphasis, because that's just a good thing for humankind and for productivity.
Yeah. We
Mark,
talk a lot on this show about jobs, about the impact on labor that AI is having and inevitably will have. Matt and I both tend to be pretty optimistic about
Me
how
too.
all this shakes out. Where do you land on that spectrum?
I am always an optimist. I locked on to a study that was done by the World Economic Forum last year, the future of work. And they predicted in 2030 there'll be 130 million new jobs created. And I think the number was 92 that will be at risk,
Mm.
but it's a net increase in employment. And I really believe that'll be the case now. We just don't know what's going to happen in terms of new business models and opportunities. But I think the world has gone through this multiple times before, and I think it'll do it again. And I think it's incumbent upon companies like us and nations to figure out how to reskill workforces and to encourage people in workforces to be using AI in any role they're in. I really believe every single individual in IFS could use AI in their job, whether that be through our facilities people, all the way through to my role. Everyone has got responsibility to use it. And if they do it and if they learn and they progress, they're going to be safe.
Yeah.
Mark, I love that.
Yeah.
We obviously love having a fellow optimist on the show, and your suggestion is echoed by a lot in the AI industry. If you're out there and you're concerned about your job, learn AI tools, learn to evolve and adapt to what's happening, and you will be more than fine. Mark, I want to thank you so much for joining today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Find Mark on X at Mark W. Moffett. Find IFS at IFS and IFS.com. Mark, thank you so much.
I've enjoyed speaking to you guys. Have a great day.
All
All
right.
right. Thanks, Mark.
Very cool. Yeah.
Very cool.
It's like one of those AI applications that you don't necessarily think about every day, except when your power, it's like when your power doesn't go out, you think about them. It's like
Right.
one of those things, like maybe you don't, but yeah, it's like one of those critical infrastructure, critical companies that helps so many different, absolutely critical industries and
Yeah.
infrastructure. So very interesting.
The stuff that keeps the world turning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to just encourage people who are watching right now to drop a like. We're really trying to push the show, and we spend a lot of time investing in it and making sure that we're bringing you the best guests, as you see. So if you could drop a like, we would very much appreciate it. We want more people to see this show and get excited about the future with us.
Yeah, and also take the time to drop a comment and let us
Yeah.
know what kinds of guests you would like to see.
Yep.
We're
Feedback
always
always
looking
welcome.
Yeah, please. All right. Well, I think we're ready for our second guest. We might as well just keep the party going. Our next guest is CEO of a company building what they call spatial intelligence, using satellites and AI to see, map, and understand the physical world in real time. Dan Smoot, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me today, guys. Appreciate it.
How's it going today?
Hey,
How's
Dan.
the day going?
Busy as usual.
Busy as usual.
Never-
Yeah, we
never a
can
dull
relate.
moment.
Dan, what do I see behind your shoulder over there?
That
That looks
would
really
be-
cool.
That is one of our 6 new Legion satellites that we launched over the last 2 years. So we've got a brand new constellation up there, taking more images of the Earth than we could possibly imagine to consume.
All right. Well, we can
Unbelievable.
spend
I'm
the
so
whole time
excited.
talking about this.
Yeah, well, maybe Dan, just start like the high level overview. What does Vantor do?
Yeah. Well, people formerly knew us as Maxar. Vantor has been rebranded as a company. We're the largest geospatial intelligence company from a commercial perspective in the world. Basically, if you think about it, we have 10 large aperture satellites roving the world, both in sun sync, which goes around this way, and mid inclination goes around this way, taking 30-centimeter images of the world every day. We cover certain locations almost up to 15 times, so we can actually see what's going on the ground in real time. It allows us to map the world in both 2 and 3D. So we have probably the largest, we do actually have the largest foundational data of both 2 and 3D digital pairs of the world, especially in the most populous areas. It allows us to drive applications like our Sentry products, which do a real-time change detection for what's going on in the world. So we can actually monitor objects and everything from new construction all the way through, vessels and rail cars that are moving around. So we pretty much are seeing everything in real time.
And
Yeah,
are
I
you
mean,
monitoring things off of Earth as well, or are you mainly focused on Earth?
We do. That is an exciting new part of our business. We actually do what's called non-Earth imaging, which we can turn our satellites and take images of other satellites. We actually got into a little imaging contest with a Chinese satellite a couple weeks ago, where they took an image of us and we took an image back, and ours was much better than theirs.
Glad to hear
So
it.
you can see what's going on out there in pretty good detail, and we're starting to archive kind of what's on orbit as well.
Dan, like what you're describing is true science fiction. It sounds incredible. This when I think of this, I think hard tech. This is the hardest of hard tech. How did you get into this?
Ironically, I came from the tech world. I spent 30 plus years with companies like Cisco and Salesforce and VMware, and it got introduced into the private equity world. And they were actually looking to transform the company, not just to be on a satellite-based imaging and data consumption, production company, but they want to turn that data into a valued asset, right? Which we can sell applications to solve, real-time world problems. And we're doing everything with this data now to, like I just mentioned, where we're monitoring in our insights capabilities to see what's going on in real time. We're building applications that do GPS denied landscape navigation for autonomous.
What does that mean?
So drones, in the drone industry, if drones are in conflict, oftentimes the first thing you want to do is jam their GPS through electronic warfare. And what we can do is we can actually take that 3D landscape we built for all these years, and we can load it onto the drones, and drones can actually navigate based on landscape. What's really fascinating is you can actually update that landscape because we're doing these constant collects. So you have a real-time landscape value. And then you can actually take the imagery from the drone and then sync it up with our landscape. And now you can actually do battlefield assessment. You can actually do it, real-time updating of the maps. But you can actually use this for consumer capabilities if you think about last mile and think about things like what Amazon's going to be doing in regards to drone delivery. Landscape navigation is really important because it's actually much more accurate based on geo accuracy than GPS. GPS is like 9 meters accurate. We're like 2. And so if you're going to be using drones to deliver stuff, you kind of want to be accurate where you're delivering it.
That's so cool. So anything that was previously using GPS, if it suddenly loses all connection, it can still figure out where to go. Is that a very compute intensive model to drive? So does a drone need to have a RTX 5090 in it? Like how does it actually work?
No, it's low compute because of the fact you're trying to use, drones are pretty agile. They can't be very heavy. They can't run heavy processing or anything like that. So you're basically onboarding a very lightweight navigation capability on the drone itself, and you're using their camera. So you're not adding any kind of external capability to it. And a lot of what we're doing is actually navigating it on the ground. So you're using ground-based terminals where you can do a lot of that kind of consolidation or forging of the information and then uploading it back in. So we try to keep it as lightweight as possible.
So you talked about the Amazon delivery last mile. Is there a scenario in which in the future GPS is secondary and your system of no GPS, just purely spatial visual is the primary way of navigation?
We're seeing that if you think about autonomous capabilities as a whole, we're right now doing autonomous capability on drones. But if you think about ground-based autonomous capabilities, cars and so forth, they're using multiple sensors. GPS is not actually the right way to do autonomous capabilities. So you think about companies like Waymo or, what Tesla's doing. They're using things like LiDAR and RF, and they're using multiple types of sensors to actually build their ground capability so they can actually drive autonomously. The things we're doing with 3D mapping and delivering those type of capabilities will be additions to it. So I don't ever see true autonomous capabilities being rendered based on GPS. I actually see most of them being the primary navigation system will be multi-sensor, and we'd love to take all that data and forge it into kind of one output.
Is this something we would? Sorry to interrupt, Dan. Is this something we would see in like just my car?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
So you have a number of very interesting partnerships going on. I think you just announced a partnership with Google to deliver Google Earth AI capabilities in a classified setting. You also have a partnership with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Androl is another one. Can you tell us a little bit about how these partnerships come to be and how they work?
Oh, those are exciting partnerships we're adding. Especially the Google one that we just announced a couple of days ago. It is a very interesting relationship. If you think about the archive of history that we have from a data perspective, we've been doing this, 20 plus years of building this incredible archive of 2 and 3D data about the world, and being able to take the AI, the Earth AI modeling capability from Google and applying it to us, we can actually give rapid information based on what's going on with objects moving around, detections, picking up, very specific objects. Using that modeling capability just advances our data incredibly fast. But what's really fascinating is you could take what used to be done by visual navigation of imagery to see change. You'd have to have analysts literally sitting there and trying to parse out what is actually, this object versus this object.
Mhm.
We could actually do that identification, but more importantly, move it to a text, tell a storyline about it. So what is the change? What is the input that is forcing that change, so you can understand, is there an event or is there some other kind of source of information that you want to add to it? And so now you're actually giving people a lot of intelligence around the changes that these images are doing. And that's the power of what we're doing with leveraging Google's Earth AI models. But what's really fascinating about this relationship, because other people have done this, is this is the first time Google has allowed a company to do it in air-gapped environments, so private enclaves. So now people can have it done on their private data. So like you think about the federal government, or you think about international community right now, the international community, and specifically in a lot of these countries, are trying to build sovereign, secure capabilities. They don't want this information out on the public web or public cloud. They want to make sure that they've got it inside their own secure environments. And so now you can apply these models inside their secure environments with Google. And this is the first time they've allowed a partner to do that. And that to me is going to be, groundbreaking for how you actually can serve sovereign country, sovereign solutions for countries.
Can you give us what your favorite use case is for like sovereign AI when they're really trying to apply it and not share the data to cloud services? What are some of those use cases you're seeing? What's your favorite one?
Well, I think when we're seeing for defense and intel, community, that I think those are always the most fascinating, because if you look at what's going on, take in Asia Pac, you've got a lot of naval movement right now going on in regards to what China's doing and what other countries are doing, and seeing how you can actually apply these models to identify, what is a fishing vessel versus what is a naval vessel, what is maybe a vessel that you don't want there. You can actually start to identify them and then map them, and then you can use these models to actually predict where they're going to be. So you start to be able to do a lot of predictive analytics in regards to, maybe we should task and look over here now to see if these vessels show up there. Maybe we want to see, how their movement in ports. And those are, to me, like really fascinating about how exquisite you can actually get in that differentiation about what you're seeing on, from a maritime perspective. You can also do that on the landscape too. You can also, understand rail cars and cars and military vehicles. It's really important to be able to differentiate the types of things that you're seeing, and and then be able to get that into kind of a reporting or text out readout, so people can actually make good decisions about what's happening around these things. So it's super exciting to me to see the speed of which we can deliver this information now. It used to take days to parse through this stuff and have people like looking at imagery, and now we can write up a report with new imagery in minutes.
Yeah.
It's so
So
amazing.
I think it's just fascinating what we can
It
do
is.
with this information now.
Dan,
Definitely. So incredible.
It's so wild. We talk about we come from the software world and we talk about competitive moats. And I'm talking to you and I'm picturing all the different layers of regulation and hardware build out and incredible expertise that your competitive moat must be absolutely insane. And then I think, and maybe I would like you to talk a little bit about this. You have satellites from competing nations up there, and you probably have to think about the defense of your own satellites. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, first off, I want to hit the competitive mode one, because that's exciting right now when you look at what's happening in the software world, right? And the value of it, having this data that we have, and having, being able to be the one who's sourcing it constantly is such a competitive advantage for us, and really does lock us out. But we also have the hardware of the production of that data, and that's really, so we have both sides. So when you think about applying AI to it, like, it just increases our value. But it does add to the thing that you talked about, which is we do have to be very wary of what the adversaries are doing out there. Space is crowded. There's a lot of things being launched into orbit, and people are looking about how they want to control their own domains. People have read about Golden Dome for the U.S. about protecting the space domain. You can only imagine that other adversaries are doing at it. But the one thing I really respect about space as a whole is actually the international community does a really nice job working together because we don't want things colliding into each other because the kinetic damage will actually take out communications and GPS and everything that all these nations are relying on. And so there's actually a lot more collaboration than I think people realize about understanding kind of like that air traffic control of what's going on in space. But we do have to be very aware that, people are going to try to jam things. They may try to spoof your information, your downlinks. And so we have huge security investments we constantly make to make sure that our imagery is secure, that our satellites are secure. And then, of course, our ground is secure. But we do spend a lot of time too making sure that we're putting stuff on our satellites and our technology to make sure that people can't put us in harm's way.
Can you paint a picture about, like, so when I think about space and low Earth or orbit where I believe most of these satellites are operating,
Right.
like how busy is it? How crowded is it actually? Because I would just think there's like a ton of room in between different satellites, but maybe like help me paint a picture.
It is there is still a lot of room out there. No pun intended with space out there, but there's still a lot of room. I mean, it's a huge area. But there's like in lower Earth orbit, there's 22,000 pieces of stuff floating around out there. 9,000 are actually active satellites. When you think about Starlink and you think about the capacity of what they've built out, from a mesh network perspective, all the satellites that are doing GPS and communications and observation and what we call the sensor capabilities. It's still a lot of stuff you're monitoring. We have a mission operating center that looks at our orbits all the time and what we're doing, and we get the red alerts that we may have to move a little bit here, move a little bit there. I think I'm bad luck because every time I show up, it seems like that red light comes on. But
is that autonomously happening, or is there a human in the loop at some point?
There's generally they've been tracking where everything on orbit is. And so it's shared with us, especially the US government, shares with so we kind of track everything. And so we'll get a automated alert that, something's out there, plenty of time, like 24 hours, to let us know if we have to move somewhere. And nothing's ever really gotten very close to us. Realistically, to your point, there's a lot of room out there still. But you still got to be aware because you don't want something to run into it because just the collateral effect could be devastating if something were to happen.
You can imagine a world when in the not too distant future, we have millions and millions of satellites up there. And at that point, does it become a real problem?
I would guess so. I think I think the thing that we have to figure out, from a space perspective is it's one thing when you're operating them and they can move and, you can actually avoid things and stuff. The concern is when you've got debris up there that is unmovable, secondary launch vehicles or other things that, a great business model for somebody to figure out is actually how to remove space debris, because that will create the congestion. It's not the active stuff that's actually on orbit and working. It's the inactive stuff that could potentially cause a problem someday.
Dan, there's been a lot of talk in the AI industry about putting data centers in space. Obviously, Elon Musk has talked a lot about it. Sam Altman kind of said we're not really close to that. What's your take on that? Is that, first of all, is it feasible? What's your predicted timeline if so?
Well, you think about the energy consumption that could be on orbit, it's pretty amazing, because the fact that you've got impulsive supply of energy. The second thing is, the compute power and the distribution from a communications perspective could be actually pretty effective. I think it is definitely in Elon's wheelhouse to kind of figure something of this magnitude out. I think his combining of SpaceX and AX is, an interesting proposition. And power grids and compute is a challenge on the ground right now. So it will be in the future, especially the predictions of, what is going to be needed. I think that you're still dealing with space. It's hard. It has environmental impacts that are pretty significant. And I think that, if they can solve it, it's an interesting proposition, but I think it comes with its own challenges that we have on the ground.
We're going to quote you, space is hard.
Space is hard.
Space is hard.
Dan, our previous guest, we were just talking about world models, and I'm changing gears a little bit here, but I'm wondering how Vantor's satellite and data products actually help with the development of world models? Is that something you all are thinking about a lot?
Yeah, and if you look at some of the investments that have been going on around the space, it's pretty amazing with World Labs and getting some of the investments. We work with we've been in discussion with some of these companies. Um, it's all about the value proposition, what you're trying to deliver with them. I think is if you look at what World Labs is doing, they're going to be building kind of more of the virtual world, right? Using AI and generative AI to kind of figure out the world and be able to use it for different use cases. If you think about what we're trying to do is we're actually mapping the actual 2D twin, digital twin in both in 2 and 3D. So they'll probably use each other's data to support what our different missions are. And I think that's important. But the foundational stuff that we do is actually it's actual. Like, we talk about geo accuracy. World, world models doesn't really care about that as much, from a foundation of what it's trying to accomplish. And so I think that's where we will always be a little bit differentiated. Our use cases are a little bit different. The reason geo accuracy really matters is, I talked about landscape navigation for autonomous capabilities. You got to know exactly where you are. World Labs, that's not what they care about. They care about more about what does the synthetic world potentially look like for different things.
Right.
That's what, if you think about what Niantic Spatial's doing and the way that they're looking at it, they're looking more for that consumer grade experience and virtual reality capabilities for like defense. Well, they're going to need somebody who's going to have to be able to put that data together in a way that has that geo accuracy that can actually make it effective data. You're not going to go do virtual reality training for a soldier if it's not accurate, because that could be a bad outcome for that soldier. And so I think the two are going to be have to work significantly together. And I think it's the impact is going to be how do we actually use the capabilities to actually drive the desired outcome? Is it going to be a consumer grade solution, or is it going to be like an effective foundational mapping capability that you need for accuracy?
Mm. You mentioned training as maybe a use case for something like this. What are the other applications that you're most excited about? I'd imagine urban planning is one that comes out a lot, understanding the layouts of urban centers and buildings. What else?
Well, that's actually, the urban setting and planning and the civil purposes of it are very strong use cases. But if you think about things like just disaster recovery or disaster planning, people don't really think about proactively. We always look at things like, the Palisades thing. We look at post facto what happened, and we never took pre facto the fact that if we'd been actually doing all the planning around it, we'd have known that this was a volatile situation. And it's like, how do we actually use these capabilities to actually put people in a better way? We're working with the Saudi government right now, and they have surprisingly, for massive desert, they have flood issues in their urban areas. So being able to path and map, that is actually a very significant issue because of the fact that they have encroachment constantly because they're growing so fast. And so how do you actually apply these things is really important. How do you actually use it in time of need? I think we oftentimes think about spatial intelligence, from a defense and intel perspective. It serves so much more for things like, looking at illegal fishing, illegal mining, deforestation, things that really are going to impact us long term. You want to be able to apply these models to be able to see what's actually going to happen to our environment, over periods of time. And these are things that we effectively are doing every day, but I think they get buried under, these other use cases that, have a little bit more noise, if that makes sense.
And
Yeah.
Dan, so as you're looking for things like illegal fishing, I was asking myself, okay, the latency on the imaging needs to be quite short. Like, can you speak to what the latency actually is? Because I know the satellites have to go around Earth, and there's a lot of coordination between them. When something happens, what is the latency before you actually get the image of it?
Well, we've had some pretty good breakthroughs on this one. I'm proud to say this used to be hours. By the time you could actually task a satellite, download it, produce
That's actually a lot shorter already than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
We've actually proven with some governments on some use cases, we can do things as short as 15 minutes.
Wow.
We did one, we had our sales kickoff now. We actually have a pretty extensive ground ecosystem. We use multiple vendors like Amazon or KSAT, and they help us build our ground capabilities, right? So we're kind of covered around the whole world. Plus we have some of our own. And that allows our contacts to be pretty frequent, from all of our satellites. So we have satellites constantly in contact with the ground. We had a sales kickoff in January down in Newport Beach, California, and we actually hit a buzzer, and we hit right as the satellite was going over the top of Newport Beach, and we took an image and we put the clock on it. And the time from when it took an image, downloaded, processed it, and sent it back to us was 12.5 minutes.
That's truly incredible, and I can imagine over time that's only going to get better. But just one last question, if you don't mind, and now to end on a little bit of a heavy question: when the latency gets that low, how do you think about privacy?
Well, I think privacy is really where it comes down to the data protection. And if you think about what governments really care about right now, especially get on the international community, they really do care about, and privacy is everything. And we have to build those capabilities into everything we're doing. So if I talked about that data latency and privacy is, making sure that their data gets to their location, securely. And that is something, if we can't do that, they won't be doing business with us. And so we have spent actually, fortunately, a couple of years building out an infrastructure with our international community, as well as the US community, as well as our enterprise customers, to be able to deliver information into what we call their private environments. As competitive as like Google and Apple are in their mapping, they don't want that imagery shared because that's a competitive advantage to them. And that's no different than imagery being shared between governments in the international market and our US government. And so that protection rate we have to do. And so we generally look at when somebody makes that request, we give them their request, their time, and we get it to their space, and we move on to the next one.
Awesome. Well, Dan, I want to thank you for bringing the science fiction future to us today. It's truly incredible what you all are building. Go check them out at Vantor Tech on X and Vantor.com. Dan, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Dan, next time we have a team offsite, can we use one of your satellites?
Absolutely.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Take care.
We're going to scope out the location we want to go to. Is that what you were thinking?
Well, they did. I mean, they kind of took like the company picture to the next level. Everyone else.
We're all going to be looking up.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
Pretty good. That's fun. I mean, there were so many more questions I had. Like, it was fascinating stuff.
It's cool because like right away he had the replica of the satellite right behind him, and I was like, oh man, that's so cool. I want one of those. Maybe I'll ask him to send it to me.
Yeah, doesn't hurt to ask.
Nah.
All right, well let's move on to our next guest. Our next guest founded a company solving one of the most urgent and potentially painful problems in AI right now: deep fakes. Vijay is co-founder and CEO of Pindrop Security, which uses AI to detect fake voices and prevent fraud across phone calls and video. Vijay, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nick, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So to start us off, man, there's so much to get to here.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions.
I'm hoping you can actually give us a state of the state. Where are we in the war against deep fakes? Are we terribly behind? Are we catching up? Where are we?
So I think the technology to identify deepfakes is alive and well. So there's a lot of great technology, but we're definitely behind in the implementation of it. And what I mean by that is when you think about spam, I don't know if you remember, there was a point in time where 80 to 95% of email was spam. And, everybody was like, man, email is unusable. I remember going from Hotmail to Gmail. At that point, Gmail came out with this new thing, and I moved because my Hotmail inbox was completely unusable. That was one of the big reasons I moved to Gmail. But we're in a similar state. And at that point in time, if you didn't have, spam filters and massive platforms like the email platforms and infrastructure adopting deepfake detection en masse, you would have lost that war. We're in a similar state. The sky is falling, but there's hope. There's a cavalry coming. You have to let it through the door. If you don't let it through the door, then you're going to be sitting with a Trojan horse, and the end is near. If you let it through, you can actually fight back.
How much of the solution is technology versus something like education? Like, I think about my parents, right? And they're just relatively ignorant to some of this stuff, that just because they don't know about it. So what do you think the balance is between technology and education here?
Yeah, I think there's a good balance of it, but education can go a little distance. But with a lot of these deep fakes, they've become so realistic that it's really hard, right? Like we used to spend a lot of time telling people, hey, look for pregnant pauses because that's the amount of time it takes for someone to type out an answer and then it show up in Nick, your voice, so that your grandmother is convinced that it's you. So there were
Mm-hmm.
these small pregnant pauses, or in video, ask them to move their hand in front of their face, or
Mm.
ask them to move from side to side. So you'd ask people to do a lot of these things to catch this. We did a recent study with deepfakes, and we found humans are 38% accurate in detecting a deepfake, which means you're worse off than a monkey with a random coin toss. Like if a monkey just said, okay, let me flip heads and say it's a deep fake, it would get it right
Wow.
50% of times. And we do that because we're either incredibly believing like my parents as well, or you are extremely paranoid and you think everything is a deep fake. And so I think we're in that state where you can't believe what you see and hear. And the technology is so good on the deepfake side that it's absolutely convincing. And we see this, right? Like with grandparents in particular, these fraudsters are creating calls that are going to senior citizens in one particular county from Friday to Sunday. And then all of the senior citizens are showing up on Monday morning at law enforcement saying, I lost $20,000, I lost $200,000. So they're becoming really targeted. They're targeting the individual grandkids or kids, and then they're using their voices to say, I'm in trouble, I'm in Mexico, please send money.
So I think this is a good time to just take a step back. What does Pindrop do from a high level? How are you solving these issues?
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're looking at both temporal and physical anomalies in audio and video to determine when something is real and when something is AI generated. So the way we think about it is for the longest time, Pindrop, we were focused on what we call the right human problem. So when someone calls a bank or when you're applying for a job, is this really Matt or is this really Nick on the other end of that interaction? And that was an important problem because attackers from West Africa or Eastern Europe would essentially try to social engineer a call center agent or the hiring recruiter to believe that it's really you. And that right human problem was very, very good for a decade until Gen AI burst into the scene. Now, our focus is on two parts of the problem what we call the real human problem, which is it even a real human on the other end of this interaction? And if it is a real human, then the right human, right? And so we're looking at both the real human and right human, and we're looking for anomalies, a whole bunch of risk signals, but also a whole bunch of things that make you, Matt, and make you, Nick, who you are, and use a combination of both positive identifiers and negative identifiers to say, hey, this is not a real human. Oh, it's actually a real human, but it's actually a West African fraudster. Oh, no, it's actually a real human, and it's actually Matt on the other end of this interaction. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're describing this, I'm reminded of a very niche YouTube and Twitch community in which there are kind of like scammer catchers. They
Oh yeah.
essentially stream themselves
Yeah.
taking all these callers, these scam calls, and they basically just try to get them and keep them on the phone for as long as possible. Like,
Yeah.
is that something that Pindrop can do? Are you just trying to identify and block? Are you trying to waste resources?
Yeah.
Like, tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
So we right now serve 8 of the top 10 banks, 5 of the top 7 insurances, some of the biggest healthcare providers, some of the biggest retailers. So we are actually on the side where if someone's pretending to be you, Matt, or you, Nick, they are essentially going to your bank accounts and draining it all out, or ordering a new credit card and buying things. They're going to healthcare organizations and targeting your life savings account or your healthcare savings account. They're going to retailers and ordering laptops on your behalf, returning them, getting refunds. So essentially, they've essentially used your digital identity through data breaches or through scams, they've gotten some kind of information from you, and then they're composing a digital identity of you with your voice, with your video, and then impersonating you in front of the bank, in front of the insurance company, in front of a retailer. And what we're doing is we're on the business side or the enterprise side, watching all of that traffic and protecting it. And just to give you a sense, in just from the first half of last year to the second half of last year, we used to see less than one AI generated fraud call per day per customer at the beginning of last year. And it's jumped to hundreds per day per customer. So a 9,800% increase in just the first half to the second half in terms of AI generated fraud. So much so that there are organizations where 70% of all of their fraud is all AI generated.
And that's just a function of the diffusion of the technology, the ease of use, how good it has been.
Yeah. So what happened is when we started doing deepfake research about 8 years back, there used to be one tool that could clone your voice. It was called Lyrebird. And as soon as it came on, we were like, okay, how do we detect this? And it's important. But even then, Lyrebird, it would take 20 hours of your voice to clone your voice. Now, there are thousands such tools like Lyrebird on the voice side and 90 such tools on the video side, all with unique architectures, and they can clone your voice and video with 3 seconds of voice and a single still image of you. And so that's all it requires. So we can very easily, for example, Matt, I can create a complete clone of you that sounds like you, talks like you, and all I need is to have called you, got your voicemail message. So I called you and you said, hey, this is Matt. I'm sorry I can't come to the phone. And that's it. That's all I need. I can clone your voice. And then I go to LinkedIn, get your picture. I train a small language model with everything that's there on your LinkedIn profile. So I know enough about you. And the system can actually act like you to a large extent.
Vijay, I stand no chance. There's hundreds of hours of me on the internet with my voice, my likeness. So I really feel like I stand no chance here.
Yeah, Vijay, we need you.
Yeah, I think it's a scary world because we're seeing this both on the customer side, on the consumer side, and even in places like hiring, right? Like a lot of these nation state actors are actually applying for jobs using deepfakes, and
I've heard of this.
Yeah, I've seen this too.
And then they're stealing information from the company. They're just kind of spending. I think I've heard a lot about. Maybe you remember this. North Korea had a lot of engineers at U.S. companies, and they were doing contracting, right? Did you hear about that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. What we've done is because we're now catching a lot of these video deepfakes, we're now finding 1 in 343 applications to a job is actually from North Korea. And 1 in 6 candidates are actually completely fake. So they might not be North Korea, they're a candidate farm out of Pakistan or Iran or out of India. So 1 in 6 candidates or 16% of your candidate pool is completely fake. And 1 in 300 actually come from North Korea. So it's actually pretty crazy. And you're exactly right. They are earning anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 for the regime. And last year alone, they made close to $500 million for the nuclear program.
Vijay, how do we possibly keep up with this technology? The classic situation in cybersecurity is that there are 2 types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that don't know yet that they've been hacked. Yeah. It kind of feels like we're in one of those situations, right? Where like the deep fakes are already happening for all of us.
Yeah.
So how do we possibly stay ahead of this?
Yeah, I think it
Give
is
us some hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an optimist, even though I sound extremely pessimistic at the beginning of the conversation. I'm a huge glass half full kind of person. There's a lot of hope, right? Like there's technology that is very easy to detect these deep fakes from. And the reason why these deep fakes are detectable is if you think about deep fakes, deepfake generation requires you to create everything about you, Nick, right? Like I have to create your intonation. I have to create what's known as your prosody. So the way you rhythmically use your voice, when you inflect, when you don't. I have to understand your behavior, where you use disfluencies, where you're saying and all of that. So a deepfake has to take care of all of these things to create a credible deepfake of you. A deepfake detection engine has to catch one mistake. And if you think about this interview, there are 16,000 samples of your voice every single second. So I need to catch a mistake in those 16,000 samples every second. And what we found is deepfake detection is 4 orders of magnitude cheaper than deepfake generation. What that means is there's a cost asymmetry. So the deepfake generation algorithms are going to get better and better, but the deepfake detection algorithms are also going to get better and better. And so as a result, because you have this cost symmetry, you're able to detect deepfakes really well. What is missing is widespread adoption of them, right? Like when the internet came out, if you swiped your credit card anywhere on the internet, your identity would be lost. You'd get scammed, you'd start losing money, all kinds of crazy things. And then you had this field of cryptography, which then secured everything once you went online. But it required widespread adoption of that technology. You're in a similar innings here where social media companies, carrier platforms, all of these need to widely adopt things like deepfake detection because that's the only way you can actually protect the end consumer from ever receiving a deepfake call or a deepfake video.
Vijay, is it just about, so when I hear deepfakes, we are talking about essentially trying to clone myself and make it look real, but there is an entire industry around creating AI avatars, right? They're not based on any human. And is your technology something that can help identify that kind of technology? Because when you talk about social media companies, I want them all to label AI generated content. I want it, and they're not doing it, and I wish they would. And so first, can Pindrop do it? And do you agree these social media companies should be labeling?
Yeah, first, I absolutely think they should be labeling because you have to give the consumer the power, right? Not just worry about the eyeballs. For them, right? Like if you have AI generated content or regular content, as long as they're getting eyeballs, life is good, right? And that has to change, right? Because if you can't trust the platform anymore, at some point in time, you're going to get off. So no matter, you better choose the carrot analogy as opposed to the stick, because if consumers find that everything is AI slop, they will start getting off your platform soon enough. But I think more than anything else, you've touched on a very important point, which is there is a spectrum of AI bots, right? There is the absolutely malicious AI bots that are out to take over your accounts. But there are bots that will do good things for you, right? Like you want your bills paid and you don't want to be standing in line or doing stuff. You want an AI agent to go do that. And is that AI agent something that you've authorized? Or is it just doing it without your authorization? And so you have to look at things like that. There are institutions that are deploying AI agents on their behalf because they're checking on what benefits does Matt have before I offer him, like, for example, a procedure, right? Like, so they're sending out an AI bot to go figure that out on their behalf so that when you come in for the procedure, they have that. That's a good AI bot, but it's on behalf of an institution as opposed to a human. And then finally, you have AI bots that are having emergent behavior. So if you look at this entire Molt book, OpenClaw, there was this recent thing that I saw where this AI OpenClaw agent tried to submit some code into an open source repository, and the person said, "No, we don't accept things from AI agents." And then it started going after the lead developer, started pulling his blog post, start showing how much of a hypocrite. So this emergent behavior was scary, right? It started becoming malicious. So I think there's a spectrum of AI bots, from the good AI bots that you've authorized to the absolutely malicious AI bots to bots that have emergent behavior. And we are looking at how do you identify each of these? How do you determine identity for them? What is their economic authority on your behalf? how much consent have you provided? So that entire spectrum is absolutely the space that we play in.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I want to actually change gears a little bit because we've been talking a lot about how these deep fakes affect fraud, but there's also an application which is equally unsettling, and that is propaganda. So how does all of this play into geopolitics? Are you seeing a lot of examples of deep fakes when it comes to messaging across countries?
Yeah, so geopolitics is one place where it's very, very scary. We were called in when back in the election time frame, President Biden was robocalled, and they didn't know who did it. So we're the ones who came in, identified which AI app was used. We helped that AI app take down the person who, it was a circus performer who, using $50, created a clone of the president of the free world and asked people to not show up at the Republican primary in November, right? But we're seeing this over and over again, right? Like recently, we were called into the Alex Peretti shooting, where there was videos of him more recently where he had an exchange with ICE, and a lot of people were like, "That was AI generated." And when we analyzed it, it wasn't AI generated. And so you're having both sides of the spectrum where stuff that is AI generated is convincing people not to go vote, and then stuff that is not AI generated is being called AI generated. And so the same thing happened with Nicolas Maduro's capture. We got called into videos of his capture, and they weren't videos of his capture, right? Like they were AI generated stuff from a completely different situation. And so you're seeing a lot of this both being posted in social media, in news media, but you're also seeing crazy new things like where senators in the US and in UK and in other countries are being called by ex-secretaries of state of, let's say, Ukraine, and they're saying, "Hey, I just left the cabinet and I have to tell you something really important about what's happening in the war." And if you're a senator here and you're like, "Okay, this was the Secretary of State, I'm going to listen to him because now that he's no longer part of the cabinet, maybe he's going to give me some intel that's going to tell me how the US should reply to the war happening." And so they're taking the call. And then in certain cases, the entire call is happening, and then they're tweeting out saying, "You know what? I had a great call with the Secretary of the State," and the Secretary of State saying, "No, no, that wasn't me," right? And in certain cases, they're saying, "Oh, I found something was off." And so you're seeing a lot of these situations where propaganda is being passed. Elections are trying to be won with videos at the right time, placed at the right time, and you're starting to see it affect elections and things like that. And ultimately, you have to have social media and news media insulated from this, because otherwise consumers are not going to know what to trust and what not to trust.
And Vijay, it's so interesting what you're describing. When you think about social media, when you think about kind of big media, mainstream media, like your technology could be that buffer, and really becomes almost an arbiter of truth. So, first, how do you handle that responsibility, and then how do you build trust with the general public, and make sure that they trust your determination?
Yeah. So, a lot of these videos, right, like in the moment are very incendiary and, get you to react in all kinds of crazy ways. But over time, the truth always sets us free, right? And so I think for a company like us, we have to be held to that standard, right? Which is, or any other company, right? Like I think this is such a big problem, figuring out, how we can bring trust back to the digital world, especially when commerce and communication and media all get broken by deepfakes. I think many companies are going to solve it. We're going to be one of them, but many companies are going to solve this problem. And all of us have to have the same high standard, right? Like when we say something is deepfake or not deepfake, how accurate were we? If we get it right, a majority of the time, so if we are accurate 90% plus of the times, then you have people starting to trust you. If you're not right, and you're also just like that random coin toss and that monkey with that random coin toss, then you have no business being in this space. So I think at the end of the day, companies that are going to be successful are going to have to prove that they have an incredible way of determining what is real and what is misinformation. And we do this at the scale of 5 billion voice interactions. So we have a little bit of pedigree in doing this right over and over for our customers, but we have to keep proving ourselves, and so does any company in this space.
So, Vijay, the last question for you. I know you guys work with enterprise, but if
Yep.
you were to give practical tips to the broad audience that we have, my mom, my dad, what are some of those practical tips to either identify when something is a deep fake or know when something that they're seeing online might not be real? What kind of recommendations do you have for them?
Yeah, so I had this. My dad is 87, my mom is 81. So I've actually had this conversation with them because I am deathly afraid they're going to get a call saying I'm in Mexico and I've run into trouble, right? And so the way we've established this is three things, right? Like one, urgency, right? Like if there's crazy urgency where I'm asking to wire the money immediately or do something immediately, don't fall for it. We also have a secret word between us, right? Which is something that we use. And then the third is I've always told them if you can't make a determination, always hang up the phone and call back, right? And so it's these three things because if they're trying to get you to act in the moment. And when you look at most attackers, they're like, no, no, don't get off the phone. You have to do this right now, or it won't, something really, really bad will happen. And so, in those situations, my parents are trained right now to ask for, okay, so if this is that urgent a situation, we've talked about a secret word between us. What's that secret word? If they're like, no, no, we don't have time for that. I need you to do it. Then hang up the phone, call them back. But never fall to the urgency prank because if you don't stop and think, that's when bad things happen. And you have to stop, breathe, and think and have a protocol. And that's what I do with my parents, and that's what I encourage everyone to do.
That's some great advice. Yeah.
Vijay, what is your passphrase?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Never mind. He's as good as he says he is. Vijay,
It's
thank
forward
you.
future, Matt.
Yeah. There it is.
Vijay, thank you so much for joining today. It's so fascinating what you're doing. I wish you all the success. Check them out at Pindrop on X. That is at Pindrop and pindrop.com. Vijay, thank you so much.
Matt, Nick, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, Vijay.
Thank you. I almost got him, huh?
That was close.
Yeah, it's right
Yeah.
there.
Worth a try. Fascinating stuff. I left feeling more optimistic than pessimistic, so I think that's good.
Yeah, I think the two most important things to me, one, I'm gonna go talk to my parents. They are, especially for their generation, extremely knowledgeable about this stuff because I talk about it all the time. I'm gonna go make sure we have a passphrase. I'm gonna talk about exactly the recommendations that Vijay just gave us. In fact, maybe I'll just send them the clip of that part. And I really hope social media companies start to label AI generated content.
Yeah.
It just seems like there's no reason not to.
So those three tips, three steps: ignore urgency, have a secret word, and
Call
when
back.
in doubt, call back.
Yeah.
All right. Our fourth and final guest of the day. Since founding in 2018, Runway has released some of the industry's most advanced and realistic video models. I'm excited for this conversation. Now they're setting their sights on something bigger, world models, AI systems that don't just generate video, but actually understand physics and reality. Here to talk all about it, co-founder and CTO of Runway, Anastasis.
Good to be
Hey,
here.
welcome.
Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So the progress of video models, I mean, frankly, all of AI, but especially video models, has just been insane. We've gone from the Will Smith spaghetti video from being just clownishly inaccurate and silly to hyper realistic. Like, what has surprised you most about this process and this progress that we're making?
Yeah, so we basically have been through the whole that whole journey. So we started 7 years ago. At that point, video generation was, was barely working at like very low resolution to finally, I think in 2023, releasing our first video model, like we had something that we could productionize to today where, you have like really incredible multi-shot outputs with audio. So it's really been kind of very dramatic. Like when it started working, it really started working very quickly, and like the progress since like the past 2 years has been quite incredible. Yeah.
Maybe we'll take a step back. Describe what Runway does.
So Runway is an applied research company. We focus on building foundational multimodal AI systems. So we're most well known for our video models, and most recently we've been kind of expanding towards world models, which are derived directly from our video models. But we basically build those models, we pre-train them, we post-train them, and then we deploy them into a wide range of different applications, most commonly inside our creative tools. So we have a creative platform where you can kind of use any of our video models to create films, ads, kind of any kind of content creation.
So you go to Runway, you type in natural language what you want to see, and a fully AI generated video is presented to you.
Exactly, yeah. So you can you type in a prompt, or you provide an image, or you start from an existing video. There's different ways of interacting with those models, and they're pretty general. And like one of our focus is to essentially make those models as general as language models. But essentially, you can really, like we've gone to the point where a lot of the outputs for those models are really just used on the final frame of, what you might distribute on social media, or in some cases directly used in TV shows or films.
Something we're undoubtedly going to be talking a lot about today, world models. Can you give us an overview of what a world model is, why there's so much attention on them right now? There's new companies popping up all the time that are focused on world models. There's a lot of capital going into world models. Give us just the lay of the land.
Yeah, so world models are essentially models that can simulate an environment and can simulate cause and effect. So you take different actions inside the environment, you can simulate what happens next. When we first started talking about world models, that was about 2 years ago when we had released some of our first video models. And at that point, it was kind of a bit difficult to convince people that if you looked at the Will Smith eating spaghetti videos, like this is the future. That those were really kind of powerful simulators of the world. But we saw that as we scaled those models, they basically learn much better physics. They were able to capture, simulate fluid dynamics well. Obviously, there's a lot of room to improve them further, but the trend is pretty clear. Like with every generation of those models, they just, on all our benchmarks that measure those things, they just become better at simulating different aspects of reality.
Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
So the way we released our first world model in December. So that was our GWM1, and it comes directly from Gen 4.5, which is our video model. So there is a very tight link between video models and world models.
What do the world models enable? If we get world models right, what does that mean for society?
Yeah, so if we take there's basically two buckets: what they enable for humans and what they enable for building autonomous systems. So what they enable for humans is essentially, we see it as a new kind of software. Once you have a world simulator, you can use it to build games on top of those simulators. So you can prompt for a world and then kind of navigate it and interact with it, and you can build all kinds of experiences on top of it. We also have a version of our world model that's more for conversational kind of video agents. So you can have a conversation with a character that's lifelike, and kind of you can have an interaction with that character. And then there is another piece of world models is what they enable for like training robotics or training kind of AV systems. So the moment you have a great world simulator, you're able to then essentially both generate data that you can use to train robotics models, but also you can evaluate how well the robotics models perform by just running them inside simulation. And that's, data collection is the most difficult piece of robotics, and being able to, and we see world models as essentially very scalable data generators to solve that problem.
How much of Runway's roadmap and future plans is based on turning these world models into video games? Because I know that seems to be what a lot of people are interested in right now.
Yeah, I would say it's a big focus area for us. We had a version of our world model called GWM Worlds that basically allows you to kind of navigate any arbitrary world. You can take any actions in it. You can, drive around. You can perform different tasks, and that's a great foundation for building games. I would say there is still a lot to do to make sure that the models can generate like very consistent worlds for a long period of time. So even if you look at other world models in the market like Genie, you have this like 1 minute limitation. So there is definitely some bottlenecks to actually getting them to amazing game experiences, but we just can see that the trend of how video models improved from the examples from 2 years ago to now, and just extrapolate the same trend for world models.
And there seems to be a divergence of opinion on what it's going to take to reach AGI. We have the Jan LeCuns of the world, the Fei-Fei Lees, that believe there needs to be spatial understanding, aka world models, to actually really take AI to the next level. Then you have, of course, the frontier large language model labs that believe we can actually reach AGI, whatever your definition is of that, with kind of the text-based models that we see today. What is your opinion on that, and why?
So we strongly believe that world models are a big key to actually getting to kind of generally intelligent systems. And the reason is essentially so much of like the most difficult challenges that we face like involve interacting with the physical world, whether it's we wanting to build robots, or whether you want to cure disease. You need a way to essentially interface with the real world to run experiments, and that's a very slow and time-consuming process. And if you had a world simulator where you can basically kind of simulate what would happen if I take this action, if I run this experiment, and get back a much quicker signal, that's a very much quicker path to actually building this like RL loop that will that will enable building artificial scientists, that will enable building really amazing general like robotic policies. So it was much easier to make progress on math or coding, where in coding you can very quickly simulate an environment directly, deterministically, by just running a program. That's much more difficult when you want to build systems that actually work well in the real world. And we've seen that bottleneck as people start from language models and try to build robotics models on top of that.
So as you're developing these systems, what are you looking for to kind of mark your progress? There's a big difference between where we are today and actually solving diseases in the real world. Like what gives you optimism that you're on the right path?
Yeah, so I mean, in the short term, I think if the way that we're now enabling kind of artists and filmmakers and creators to make to make entire films, to make their kind of ad campaigns, to make anything they want to make, is it looks completely different what the interaction is like today compared to 2 years ago, when those models were only being used for like prototyping, or for just very very kind of rough iteration.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to more the understanding the capabilities of world models, we have benchmarks that basically measure how well does the world models simulate gravity, how well does it simulate fluid dynamics, and you can get fairly rigorous with that, and track the progress of how well those models perform at very like solid mechanics, fluid dynamics, all those different areas. So there is both the eval side and then the more kind of practical use cases, which today those models have way more than 2 years ago. And in 2 years that they're gonna expand even further.
I feel
That's
I feel
so
like
cool.
the frontier language model labs and the industry in general is much more obsessed with the benchmarks that you described than what we're seeing with video models and world models. Is that true? Are you constantly putting out benchmarks like how accurate is physics, fluid dynamics when you're releasing a new video or world model?
In some cases, we've done that. I would say one nice property of video models is that you can just see with your eyes, like it just looks way better. Like it's
Just
very
look at it.
often,
Yeah.
yeah. So the improvement is quite like you don't necessarily need a benchmark to measure to compare between the video outputs of today versus 2 years ago. Like you can just tell because humans are, our perceptual faculties are very attuned to any imperfection in video. So in some ways it's much more, it makes evaluation a bit easier because you can qualitatively tell. But we do think it's also important to have some kind of more quantitative idea of like where we stand. So it's really a mix of both, but I would say it's easier to tell with your eyes with video models.
So
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
no, I want to switch topics just for a minute. I mean, I'm sure you talk about Hollywood and get asked questions about Hollywood all of the time. I have a close friend of mine who is the leader of a VFX company, works with a bunch of studios. He's integrating AI into every aspect of his job. Uh, but he says a lot of people in Hollywood are very fearful. And he also interestingly said, none of the studios are willing to use any of the Chinese video models, and so they're really left with one option, which is Runway. That's like there is like you guys are kind of on a tier of your own in terms of US based frontier models. So, what are your thoughts on the future of Hollywood? Is Hollywood done? Is it like where do you fall on that spectrum?
So yeah, as you said, we work with pretty much like most, if not all, of the major film studios, and it's been a long kind of groundwork to get here, and a lot of conversations to basically make them aware of what those models can do, and make them aware that you can use them in conjunction with traditional methods. Like we have models that can take an actor's performance and translate that into a video model output, and you can perform as a different character. So there's all these ways in which the old world and the new world can interact that are not always obvious to people and like not always obvious in public discourse. But I do think Hollywood will need to reinvent itself. Like there is obviously those models allow you to do things with like very little resources that you couldn't do before, and that changes who can create kind of films, who can be part of that conversation. And I think we're going to see a 100x or 1,000x of like the number of films in the world, and like that the ecosystem needs to change because of that. But I do think there is a continuing need for like taste and talent, and like those things are not going away, and it's still going to be the same distribution of what's kind of the masterpieces and the very high quality works of art versus the rest. It's just like the absolute number will be different. The percentages are going to be similar.
When you think about movie stars, there's the cachet and the reputation, the familiarity that audiences have with that star. And, that's a big draw to go see movies. Oh, my favorite actor is in that movie. Do you think AI will be able to replicate that experience, or will there always be human stars in the loop at some point?
I do think it's likely that the concept of celebrity will have a place even with generated content. It might look different, like basically being able to license your likeness to be used in a generated video or film. There's going to be all those like creative solutions that I think come up, but I do think there is still like that concept will likely remain. I've seen. I guess there is like this new set of kind of AI celebrities and AI influencers, and maybe that will continue to be a rising trend. But I'm not very convinced that the current kind of star system is going to go away.
I've been seeing this nascent trend of creators, not creators in front of the camera, but folks who are using artificial intelligence to create fan fiction based on their favorite IP. We just saw Disney and OpenAI partnered together. How do you think about that? Are you going to be partnering with IP holders to offer their IP, obviously with very strong guardrails around it, to your customers?
So we've done actually quite a bit of work on different partnerships with film studios. Our Lionsgate partnership was kind of one of the first of its kind, of just AI company partnering with a film studio. And I think there's going to be all kinds of kind of creative solutions to figuring out like how IP can be used in generative video. For us, our partnership was primarily in terms of kind of being able to leverage a library of film and videos, and then doing custom fine tuning of models for their library. But when it comes to using IP, like I do think there can be a lot of value in having, you know, fun fiction and like people creating films on top of like a kind of beloved character. But there's probably gonna need, like, it's gonna be the case where like the kind of creators and the studios will need to meet in the middle in some way, where the platforms will provide some sort of guardrails of like how you can use those characters, but there's going to be, and then some form in which like you can still use the characters provided those guardrails.
So how close are we to just an average everyday person being able to create a feature length Hollywood film? Is that ever going to be a reality?
I think it's months away. Like we're getting very close. Like we went from a few seconds of generation to being able to generate multi-shot video of up to a minute length, and that's gonna only scale. So it's hard to predict exactly when those things will happen, but I think we're basically very close to being able to generate an entire feature-length film. Creating a great film is a different question, and I think it's still going to be the same. Where if you have the taste, you have the vision, if you have the skills, there's still a barrier to entry to make creating content. It just you're going to need much less resources to do so.
So if I'm in film school right now, what should I be focusing on? Obviously, I need to understand how to use the tools. I need to familiarize myself with the tools.
Tell a good story.
Should I be focusing on how to tell a good story, character development, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, those things are not going away. You still need to have the understand the basics of filmmaking, of like what makes a good shot, of cinematography, of narrative. Like those things translate perfectly into AI video. And in fact, you can now experiment with a lot more ideas much faster. So you can see, like, even if you end up shooting your film in real life, you can still see what the 80% version of it looks like very quickly, and that lets you try a lot more ideas than before. So we've seen like people that had no filmmaking experience become filmmakers because of those tools. But even for the professional filmmakers, the biggest benefit for them is at any given point they have 100 ideas of like things they want to make, and they have to pick and like de-risk and like pick the thing that maybe not their craziest idea, just because it seems more viable. But now they can just test all of them before kind of going out and actually building them.
Do you think there's a possibility where we can actually get a high quality film from an end-to-end AI system? Meaning, let's say we take one of the biggest frontier lab text language models, and then it is used to prompt, to direct everything within Runway. It puts it all together, describes each shot, and really there's no human in the loop. Do you think there's any chance that film might actually be watchable and high quality?
And can you start the prompt from OpenClaw? Yeah. Most importantly.
I mean, you should try generating a TV pilot from with even the frontier LLMs, like they're not there yet in terms of actually creating something that seems possible. They tend to have this kind of reversion to the mean where they create very kind of generic generic stories and outputs.
Yeah.
At the same time, you can use them to like brainstorm on like what are the possibilities of like what the characters can do next, or what are some details I can add to this world. I think they're not quite there in terms of generating the whole narrative in a way that's compelling, but they are likely to get there. There is no foundational reason they're not going to get there.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I haven't seen humor that was actually novel from a model. I haven't really seen taste that felt like it's something I hadn't seen before. So I tend to agree with you. Anastasis, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Check them out on X at a Germanidis. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Check it out on X, Runway ML, at Runway ML, and runwayml.com. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really fun.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Ah, what a great show. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was. I mean, we really like had the whole range of technologies on today's show. That was a good one. But that's it. We want to thank our guests, Mark from IFS, Dan from Vantor, Vijay from Pindrop, Anastasis from Runway. Nick, as always, thank you so much for co-hosting.
Thank you, Matt.
Want to thank everybody for watching as well. Thanks for the crew behind the scenes. And check us out at Forward Future on X, forwardfuture.ai for our newsletter, and we will see you next week.